Hi, my name is Elise Stevens. I'm 38 years old. I live in Union, Oregon. And 15 years ago, I was kidnapped and held hostage while pregnant with my oldest daughter by her biological father. And this is a story of how I escaped and my life after trauma. Growing up, my mother was a disconnected mother. She was a narcissist and she put on a good face for the society, but behind the doors, it was not a good home. I was never educated about domestic violence or that men could be violent. I was actually often taught a mentality that all men were evil and that you can just do it on your own. She didn't actually ever even want me to date. Due to generational trauma, like I saw my grandma treat my mom this way, my mom treat us this way. I didn't want to have children and treat them that way. And then so when I was 18, I was diagnosed with PCOS and told I couldn't have children. And in a way, it was a sense of relief for myself that I wouldn't have to pass that on to my children. 15 years ago, I went to go get gas from a gas station, and this gentleman introduced himself to me, but he was very forward and very pushy, and I was not interested at all. He kept pursuing me and lived in the same apartment complex as a close friend of mine at the time. And he begged me one night to please just go out to the bar with him as friends. And I honestly told him, if you shove a tampon up your nose and leave it there for an hour, I will go out with you as a friend. And he did it. So I went to the bar with him just as a friend. He went and bought my first drink, even though I asked him not to, but then I felt obligated to drink the drink he got me, and I don't remember anything after the fourth drink of that drink. The night went black, and the next morning I woke up and was in his apartment, and I asked if he used protection, and he said no. We did not date. Afterwards, he tried to be my friend, and I put this isn't happening. And then I found out I was pregnant. And then my mom said, you're not going to embarrass me. I was scared to death that I was pregnant. My mother immediately just said, you're not going to embarrass me. You're going to stay with this man. Your sister's already had a child out of wedlock. You're not going to do this to the family. And I told her I didn't care for him, and an abortion was completely out of the idea. My mom made it very clear I was not to do that. That would be an even bigger embarrassment, that I was to give birth to this child, and I was to marry this man, and I was to live happily ever after. And that's what he wanted. He was immediately, let's get married. I love you. He love bombed me immediately, told me he would supply everything I needed, and we would never have to ask my parents for anything or my mother for anything. And my mom kicked me out of my home, so I really had nowhere to go. So I did move in with him when I was about 4.5 weeks pregnant, and he choked me for the first time when I was 6 weeks pregnant. And I left again and went and talked to my mom, and my mom said, no, I told you, this is your bed, you're gonna lie in it, you go and you deal with what you need to deal with. And that scared me, because this man put his hands around my neck, and she acted like it was normal and it was okay and acceptable, and it wasn't. He had removed all forms of contact at that point. Like I had my cell phone, but he very rarely let me talk to my friends or my family. I couldn't keep them up to date with what was going on with the baby. He would immediately connected me with his mom and his family and his friends. So the night that he put his hands around my neck, I just needed to go to work. I had just recently graduated from beauty school. I had an expensive car payment, and I had a lifestyle that I wanted to live, and that's what I was trying to do. I didn't believe that being pregnant meant I had to stop my lifestyle, but he did. And he wanted me controlled, and he saw this, well, you're pregnant, you can't be doing things, as a way to control me. So at 4.5 months pregnant, he wanted to go out to the strip club, and I had just gotten paid, so he wanted to take my paycheck out to the strip club, and I said no. So I compromised and said, let's go back to our hometown and sing some karaoke with some old friends, go to the bar there. And I was pregnant, so I did the driving. It was about an hour each way. And I again had to work the next morning. So at 11 p.m. I asked him, let's head back home. I have to work in the morning. I'm pregnant. He did not like that answer. On our way home, he grabbed my steering wheel and tried to rip it so that I would flip. And I got him to calm down and got him to just like breathe and it's okay, let's get home. And at this point, he was pretty intoxicated. So I parked the closest parking spot I could to the door, and I ran as fast as I could to hopefully get there before him, because this was a cycle and I knew what was going to happen. He unfortunately beat me to the door, ripped me inside, began attacking me, and then calmed down and asked for some food. And so I was like, yeah, I'll make you a sandwich, just calm down. And I was trying to de-escalate the situation. And as I was making his sandwich, he came behind me with like those serrated knives, and he just jammed it right into my abdomen, into my upper right quadrant, and he missed everything. It went in about that far. And I said, you just stabbed me. And he said, no, I didn't. And I said, the knife was sticking out of my stomach. I said, well, then did that just fall from the ceiling and land there? And he goes, must have. And I ran to the bathroom as fast as I could, because the bathroom is the safest place in a home. So I got to the bathroom, but I was pretty beaten at that point, and I spent the night in the bathtub as he slept against the door of the bathroom. And I woke up the next morning and I had blood everywhere. I was urinating blood. I was weeping blood and pus out of my abdomen wound. I was pretty bad, and I asked him to take me to the ER and he refused. So I drove myself to the ER and I was admitted for acute kidney failure. And I told them that I had fallen down the stairs and landed on an X-Acto knife. And so that is what is in my medical records. And so he likes to say that it never happened because of that. But out of fear of what was going to happen when I got out of the hospital, because my mom had already made it very clear I was not welcome home and I was to make this work, I was scared I was going to die. And when I left the hospital, I was there for 12 days. And when I left the hospital, he had packed everything into the U-Haul and told me, get in the U-Haul or I'll kill you. And I said, what? And he said, we're going to my mom's. And he made me go around town and tell everybody how excited I was about going to his mom's and living this life. In reality, I was so scared he was going to take me and kill me. Thankfully, we ended up at his mom's. I mean, that was not great, but it was a better option than being murdered. I was kept in a 10 by 10 room there. So I was 5 months pregnant, about 4.5, 5 months pregnant when we moved up there. So I was kept a little over 5 months. I had no phone, no internet, no way of contact. It wasn't the world of social media back then. You know, there was not this, hey, I need help. It wasn't accessible. And it's, for a lot of women, it's still not accessible today, but it absolutely wasn't accessible back then. I wasn't allowed to speak to any of my family. I did get fed, and they took care of me in the fact of like, see, the baby was a prize to them. What I did not realize until I was older is that my daughter was actually a ploy for him to get higher up in this gang that he was part of, and it became really disgusting and sick in a lot of ways. So the baby was a prize. He would choke me out in front of his mom, and then his mom would tell me if I wasn't such a bee, then he wouldn't have to do those things. I was told I had to cook and clean. I was more their slave. I helped take care of his stepdad, who was passing away from ALS. I wasn't allowed to leave the home without him or his mother. I would sit in his car while he was at work. So there was this, like, people thought I lived this great life because when they saw me out with him, I was allowed to eat and I was allowed to do these things. But behind closed doors, I was beaten and treated like a dog. My mom knew where I was the whole time. She knew that I was with him. She knew that I had moved to Tacoma. Like I said, he made me go around and tell everybody where I was going and made it seem like such this great thing. So she knew exactly where I was the whole time. She had no questions. She was just told everybody, oh, she ran off with her boyfriend. She's gonna get married. So when I came back and when I asked for help, people were like, what are you talking about? You've been gone. Like, your mom knew where you were. And it took me a long time to accept the fact that I actually was kidnapped and held hostage, because when I did come back, I was never validated by the people that should have been said, like, oh my gosh, where have you been? Oh my gosh, this happened. It was more like, well, you made that choice, so go with it. So the day my daughter was born was truly the best day of my life. It was the day that I realized that I had to get out of the situation I was in and that my mom was wrong. I was 38 and a half weeks pregnant and I woke up with some just back pain, and his mom was like, oh, stop whining. Well, the back pain kept getting worse and worse and worse. And she's like, fine, whatever, I'll take you in to the doctor, but I'm going to stop and get myself food first. And I mean, I obviously was an inconvenience in her life, and I had no Lamaze classes. I had no clue what was going to be happening to my body in a matter of hours. I was 22, I was young, and I was alone. I got to this hospital, and they said that I wasn't in labor to go ahead and go home. And as soon as I stood up, my water broke. And they were like, oh no, you are in labor, stay here. So then she ended up calling all her friends and family, and I had 10 people, I had no clue who they were, in the birthing room watching me push my daughter out. My ex did not allow me to have any epidural because he said since he was an addict, it wasn't fair to him that I got to have pain pills while I was in pain. So I was not allowed to have any pain pills while I gave birth, and I didn't have any Lamaze classes. So I pushed my daughter out when I was 8 centimeters. It was extremely traumatic and it was horrible. And when I was released from the hospital, he then stole the pain pills that I was sent home with, and I hemorrhaged and almost died, and they found me passed out in the bathroom with blood all over, and they still blamed me and told me that it was my fault. I had to clean up the blood before they would take me to the ER, and I was readmitted for 4 more days. In those 4 days that I was readmitted, this most beautiful nurse I had ever met came out of nowhere, and she said, I want you to know you're stronger than you believe you are, and you can get out of this. And I hadn't told her what was going on, but she knew. She could pick it up, and it was that nurse giving me the strength to get out, allowed me to start making the steps to be able to see my worth, and that my mom had set me up for this failure as much as my ex had done it to me. I escaped by, I'm not proud of it, by stealing. I stole dimes, nickels, pennies, dollar bills from anyone and anywhere I could until I had $43.72 saved up to be able to buy a train ticket to go from Tacoma, Washington to Portland, Oregon. And it took me a little under $40, so I had like $7. I had the rest to buy the food and everything I needed to make it through. And I have a list somewhere. I've yet to ever post it because it is mine, but a list of all the things I stole and how much they were, and I sent money back to those people, and I felt horrible for what I did, but it was the only way I could get out. I rode a train from Puyallup, Washington, or Tacoma, Washington to Salem, Oregon, and I called a dear friend I hadn't talked to in months, and I said, please just come get me, no questions asked. She showed up, she took me back to her apartment, but unfortunately, narcissists are really great at finding out where you're at and what you're doing. So he was not too far behind me, and he had taken me again back up to Tacoma. But while I was gone, a person I knew had an open cold sore on their lip and kissed my daughter with it. And so my daughter came down with meningitis of the herpes virus, and at 3 weeks old, and had to be put in Marybridge Children's Hospital and was comatose for 5 days. And it was a nurse there that said, honey, you need to call home and you need to leave, and you will be safe here until someone can come get you. And she actually gave me her cell phone and had me call my mom, and I know that's the only reason my mom came and got me, was because she knew that somebody official had said, hey, she needs help, come get her. And my mom was like, oh great, now I'm gonna have to. My ex and I, after that day, played kind of a cat and mouse game for the next 2.5 months. It was catch me and let me go. He raped me in the city park when I was 4.5 weeks postpartum, and I ended up pregnant. And I had an abortion at 7 weeks. It was everything my family was against, but at this point I had realized that I didn't care what my mom said. I couldn't do that to another child. And I couldn't do that to the child I already had, and I couldn't do that to myself. I wrote a 14-page paper in high school on why abortion was never an option, and I was at Planned Parenthood making that choice. I am a Christian woman who believes in it's your choice to make that, and I had to make that choice. And for many years, I beat myself up and had to live with that own pain, but I've let go of that now. But that was something another thing he stole from me, another thing. And so when It was November 19th, 2009. He attacked me for 6.5 hours straight, and I ended up with being headbutted, having cauliflower ear, having hot oil burns from head to toe, 3 fractured vertebrae in my back, a fractured rib, and bruises all over me. And my daughter was in my arms for 75% of that attack. So I finally had the confidence to call the police, and he was arrested and charged that night for the attack. That was the end, but that was only the end because I had a wonderful group of strangers who had stepped up and said, "You're not going back." And I am still best friends with most of those strangers today, and one of them is my husband. It was a group of people that he had known, that I didn't know, that knew how he was, that said, "No, you're not doing this. You're not going back." And I did have a Stockholm syndrome. I wanted to go back. I wanted to please him. I wanted to love him. I wanted to show him and prove to him that I wasn't these bad things he said I was. And my husband of now, who was just a friend at the time, said no. He packed me up and my 3-month-old daughter, and he moved us to his home. And like I said, at that time, complete just friend, nothing more. And he's like, "I know what's going to happen. You're going to go back to him, and I can't watch you do this to yourself or your child, and you'll stay here and I'll help you." And he went to court with me, and my best friend went to court with me, and they supported me through it. And there were still times though, even with that support, where I got in myself of, I need to go back, I need to apologize, and I'm sorry. And it was it was a battle for years. And it's almost like I've often thought that we need sponsors, like I'll call anonymous sponsors, that when we get to the point where we're like, we're gonna call him and go back, you can call your sponsor instead and be told, "No, don't go back. You got it this time." Because that's what it took for me. And we need that for the women. It's more than a relationship. It's mental control that you can't understand. I used to share my story to help people to stop from getting in these relationships, or to keep from getting in these relationships. And that is still my hope today, is that I will help somebody be able to see the red flags before stepping into a relationship. But over the 2.5, 3 years of sharing my story, I've realized that I can't stop people from stepping into these relationships because they're everywhere. But what I can do is I can show these people that there is life after these relationships, that these relationships don't have to ruin you and destroy you for the rest of your life. And I used to believe 4 years ago, I used to walk around and say, I'm healed and I'm better and I'm okay and I'm this and I'm that. And I wasn't. I weighed 300 pounds. I was angry. I could smile when I was out on the street. Yeah, but when I looked at my home life and how angry and how hurt I was, the reality is I didn't heal. And the last 3 years, I have found a peace, a happiness past my trauma, a joy without allowing my trauma to dictate my life. And that's where I'm like, I want people to know there is a life after trauma. I look back every day and think, what am I doing? And even my husband, so my husband is 6'2" and he is 350 pounds and he is ginormous and humongous, and he could take me out with one punch. I'm not even joking. Never been scared of that man in my life. Ever been scared. The man that attacked me, he was 5 foot, he weighed 140 pounds, soaking wet, and my husband often said, why didn't you just clock him? You outweighed him. Why didn't you ever just clock him? Because I was so scared. And now I look back and I even ask myself, why didn't I just clock him? I would never let my husband now treat me how I let him treat me. I often think, what the hell was I thinking? And you don't realize that until you're there, though. Because I have had so many people over the years say, well, you're just stupid or you're just this. And then they've gone and they've gotten themselves in a relationship like that. And they've come back to me and said, hey, I'm sorry. I ended up getting myself in a relationship like that also. So you don't realize the mental control a person can hold over you until you are actually there. And if you grow up in a narcissistic home, then you never understand how to accept or show true love because you don't have an example of true love. And that was the point I got to, and I had to honestly start over like a baby. In 2013, I decided to not have any relationship with my mother after a lot of years of just trauma. And then in 2019, my mom called and asked for help, and she had promised me that she was sober, and she'd promised me all these things. And then 2020 hit, and my family decided we were going to pack up and move 300 miles to help my mom. And I walked right back into an abusive situation. And I was 35 years old. She was still the she was when I was a child. She abused my children. She abused myself. And she allowed us to move into this home, and then she evicted us, and then she sued us, and it was horrible and disgusting. And I was 35 years old, and I looked at her and I said, I have spent my whole entire life trying to please a woman who doesn't even like herself. I will never be able to make you happy, so I'm going to step back and remove myself. And I did, and I didn't speak to her from that day. And she passed away 4 weeks ago, and a lot of people said, you'll regret it, you'll be sad, you need to go say goodbye. I loved my mom for giving birth to me, but I do not have to like my mother for who she is. If you ask my children, the first few years of their life was pretty traumatic because I allowed my trauma to dictate how I parented my children. It didn't have anything to do with how my mom was as a person. It was truly that my mom had her own trauma. I actually found out before my mom passed away from my grandmother that one of the reasons my mother was so angry and against abortions was because she had chosen to have one herself and refused to ever accept it. And so in time, I realized that it wasn't my mom that was mean. It was the trauma that made my mom mean. And that actually helped me to realize that if I didn't release my trauma, I would end up just like my mom. And I say that one biggest thing to my kids, and my kids will tell you every day, is that I apologize. I apologize every day to my kids. I apologize if I am mean to them. I apologize if I say something that I shouldn't. I apologize for some of the simple things like, hey, I'm sorry I knocked into you. Because I can say in my 38 years of life, my mother never apologized to me, ever. And you know, kids are human and they deserve to be treated like humans. And they just need to be taught. They don't need to be beaten and controlled and yelled at. They just need to be taught.